Montana Territory, February 1882, the moment her horse lost its footing on the icy bank of the Yellowstone River. Everything changed. Petra Whitlow had barely cried out before the ice cracked beneath her saddle and sent her plunging into the black, freezing water. The current dragged her under so fast, her breath caught in her throat, and all she saw was white sky and shards of ice spinning above her. She had not meant to ride this far from the logging camp. But the snowstorm had passed in the night, and the air was clear for once. She had just wanted a moment alone, away from the noise and the men. Her father's camp ran hard, and after his death last spring, the foreman had made it plain she was just a burden. She was not wanted, not needed. Now she was drowning. The cold was like knives in her lungs. Her skirts tangled around her legs. Her fingers could not grip the ice when she finally surfaced and tried to claw her way out. Then there was a voice. Low, steady, hold still. Do not fight it. A rope landed beside her shoulder, and the next second, strong arms grabbed her coat and hauled her up from the river like she weighed nothing. Petra coughed up half the river before she could speak. Her vision blurred, her teeth chattered, and her body shook so violently she could barely tell how solid the ground was anymore. But there was warmth, rough wool, a gloved hand pressed against her cheek, a coat wrapped around her shoulders, and a man's voice again, quiet and sure. You are all right now, I have you. She blinked up and saw a face she had glimpsed only a few times in town, a cowboy, tall, broad, with dark blonde hair and a jaw dusted with snow. She remembered his name from the mercantile register, Wade Dempsey. He rarely spoke. Just nodded when someone thanked him. Always alone, he was not alone now. He was kneeling beside her, cradling her head in his lap, his coat about her like a shield. You pulled me out, she said, her voice hoarse. I was under. He nodded once. You were. Why were you even here? I saw your horse run past me with an empty saddle. His voice was so calm it steadied the shaking in her ribs. Figured someone needed help. Petra gripped his coat tighter. She was soaked to the bone, her lips were blue, her fingers numb. I could have died, she whispered. But you did not. He lifted her in his arms like she weighed nothing and walked, steady and purposeful, across the snow-covered path toward a small cabin she had not known was there, tucked between a stand of pine and a hill slope. Smoke rose from its chimney. He carried her inside and set her down gently beside the hearth, where a fire already burned low. He peeled off her wet boots first, then her coat, moving with care as though she might break. When she tried to protest, he looked her straight in the eye. You need to be warm, he said. I will not look, I promise. She let him. She had no strength to argue, and his eyes never wavered from hers, true to his word. He wrapped her in a thick wool blanket and set a tin cup of coffee in her hand. I will dry your clothes by the fire, he said, already hanging them on a line near the hearth. You just sit still. Petra stared at the flames, trying to make sense of the last hour, of the man now crouched beside her, his eyes scanning her face like he was memorizing every inch. You live here alone, she asked. Wade nodded. I ride fence for the Bar K. They let me use this cabin in winter. I did not know anyone stayed out this far. Most do not, she studied him. He was quiet, yes, but not cold. His movements were careful, gentle. His voice was low, but there was something warm in it, reassuring. You saved my life, she said. He looked away, poking the fire with a piece of kindling. Anyone would have. No, she said. Not anyone. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the fire's crackle and the wind outside. She took another sip of the coffee. Her hands were still shaking. I do not know how to thank you, she said. You already did. He stood, crossed the room, and opened a cedar chest. He pulled out a dry shirt and trousers and set them beside her. They will be big, he said. But warm. Petra took them, fingers brushing his as she did. He stilled for a moment at the touch, then gave a small nod and turned away to give her privacy. She changed quickly, the warmth of his clothes a comfort. When she looked up, he had placed a blanket and a pillow on a cot near the fire. You should rest, he said. Shock takes more out of a person than they expect. Her eyes burned, not from cold now, but from something she could not name. "Why are you this kind to me?" she asked. He met her gaze without flinching. "Because you needed someone to be." She lay down, wrapped in the blanket, and watched as he sat across the room, his back to the wall, watching the fire, but every now and again, his eyes drifted to her, soft and quiet. And for the first time since her father died, she felt safe. When she woke again, it was late. The fire was lower, but the room still warm. Wade was asleep in the chair, arms folded, hat tilted over his brow. She sat up quietly, her body sore, but her heart steadier than it had been in months. She stood, walked over, and gently took the blanket from her cot and draped it over his shoulders. As she did, his eyes opened, not startled, just calm. "You should be in the bed," he said. "So should you." They looked at each other for a long moment, then she smiled, small but real. "Thank you," she said again. He gave a slow nod. "You are welcome, Petra." She had not told him her name, her heart beat faster for a different reason now. "You knew who I was." "I did." She tilted her head. "How? I have seen you in town." "Once or twice." "You remembered me." "Yes." The way he said it made her chest ache, soft, honest. There was something in his eyes now that was not just concern, something deeper. Something he had kept quiet until now. She stepped back, giving him space, but her heart was no longer cold. Outside, the wind howled. But inside that cabin, something had shifted. Wade Dempsey had given her back her life, and Petra Whitlow was beginning to see the quiet truth in his eyes. The next morning, Petra woke to the smell of beans warming in cast iron and the faint rustle of a knife against wood. She sat up slowly, breath catching at the low light pouring through the frosted window. Her body still ached from the cold, but the stiffness had dulled. She tugged the borrowed shirt tighter around her and stepped carefully onto the plank floor. Wade stood at the table, slicing dried apples into a tin bowl. His coat was hung by the door, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He didn't look up right away, but something in his shoulders shifted when she moved. "You're awake," he said. "I am," she answered, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you for the clothes and the fire, and well." "Everything?" He glanced over, eyes resting on her face for a long second before returning to his task. "You're welcome." She moved closer, studying the small cabin in full light now. There were no decorations, not even a spare chair. Just what was needed: tools neatly hung, a rifle propped by the door, a saddle blanket folded in the corner. She passed a low shelf and paused. "You carve," she said. He looked over his shoulder. "Sometimes." She lifted one of the small figures, a horse rearing, no bigger than her palm. The detail startled her. The mane, the curve of muscle, the tiny etched eyes. "These are good." He wiped his hands and joined her. "It passes time, you've got a steady hand." He nodded, then motioned to the table. "You should eat something." She sat across from him, the warmth of the stove soaking into her legs. He passed her a plate without a word. She took a bite, chewed slowly. "This place," she said after a while, "feels like it's yours even if it isn't. It suits me." "Why?" He took a sip of coffee before answering. "It's quiet." She studied him, the slope of his shoulders, the way he kept his eyes on the window more than her. "You don't like town?" "I've never needed much company." She tilted her head. "That's different from not needing anyone." He didn't speak. The silence filled with the low creak of wind against the walls. "You've been in Montana long?" she asked. He set his cup down. "Since the war." She waited, but he didn't add more. "My father served," she said. "He didn't speak of it." "Most don't." She looked down at her plate, then back at him. "What did you do before fence riding?" "Drove cattle." "Spent a year up near Deadwood mining, but the gold wasn't worth the cold. I came west to look for quiet work. This was the first place that let me stay." She traced the rim of her plate with one finger. "You said you saw my horse yesterday, that you followed." "I was coming from the south field. Saw the mare bolt through the trees, figured something was wrong. I didn't think anyone had seen me leave." "You ride straight-backed, same as your father," she blinked. "You knew him." "When I first arrived, he let me haul timber one winter, paid fair, spoke little. Wore a red kerchief round his neck, even in summer." Her throat tightened. "He always said it kept the dust out." Wade nodded once. "He was a good man." They fell quiet again. Outside, the wind pulled at the eaves. Petra stood, crossing to the window. The snow had settled deeper in the night, blanketing the hills in a hush. "I should get back," she said. "Camp will be worried. They'll have seen the mare." She turned. "Still, I shouldn't stay longer than I have." He didn't stop her, but he didn't move either. Just studied her like he meant to remember how she looked in his shirt, standing in the morning light. "I'll walk you to your horse," he said finally. She nodded, pulling the sleeves down to her wrists. "Do you ever come into town for the dances?" "No." "Why not?" "I don't dance," she smiled faintly. "Neither do I, but I go sometimes, just to see that life still moves." He met her eyes then, and something in his expression softened. "I'll saddle the mare." She followed him out into the cold, boots crunching over packed snow. The sky was clear, the sun catching on every branch like glass. He led her to the low barn behind the cabin. Inside, the chestnut mare stood calm, already brushed down. Her saddle was dry. There was even a biscuit tucked into the saddlebag. "You planned ahead," she said. "I figured you'd want to leave soon as you could." She reached up, stroking the mare's neck. "You're not wrong, but I'm not in a hurry either." He held the bridle steady as she mounted. His hand brushed her boot as he stepped back. "I'll walk you to the ridge," he said. They rode in silence, side by side through the snowdrifts, the trees parting to show the long slope back toward the camp road. When they reached the edge, Petra reined in. "They'll ask what happened." He looked toward the ridge, then back at her. "You don't owe them any answers you don't want to give." She leaned forward, resting her hands on the horn. "Maybe I'll just say a quiet man pulled me from the river. And that he didn't ask for anything in return." He nodded once. She watched him a long moment, then reached down and touched his wrist. "I do want to see you again." The wind stirred between them. He didn't look away. "You know where to find me," he said. She smiled, then turned the mare down the slope. She didn't look back. Wade stood at the ridge long after she vanished into the trees, the imprint of her fingers still warm on his skin. The sawmill whistle wailed just after sunrise, splitting the stillness over the pine flats south of Livingston. Petra stood at the edge of camp, her hands wrapped around a basin of clean clothes, watching the men spill out of the bunkhouse like ants stirred from a nest. No one looked her way. They rarely did unless something needed mending or fetching. Today, she didn't mind their silence. She had been back 3 days. The first morning, she'd found her saddlebag hung on the rail, biscuit untouched. The mare had been stabled, combed smooth. One of the younger loggers mentioned a cowboy had led her in just before dawn and left without a word. She hadn't seen Wade since. She rinsed the last shirt in the creek behind the cook tent and wrung it out with slow hands, her thoughts drifting toward the timberline. It was a full 6 miles to the cabin. Too far to walk. Too far to have an excuse. She laid the shirt over the line and turned back toward the tent. The foreman's wife, a pinched woman with a voice like gravel, had already begun barking about supper rotations. Petra moved to help, but her mind stayed elsewhere. That night, long after the stew pots were scrubbed and the lanterns snuffed, she sat on the porch of her father's old supply shed and traced stars with her finger. Orion was low. Snow was coming again soon. She pulled Wade's shirt tighter around her. She hadn't returned it. The next morning, she saddled the mare before light. She didn't leave a note. No one would look for her unless she stayed gone a full day, and even then, camp talk would just fold her absence into a story of a girl who never quite fit. The trail climbed slow, veering east through bare cottonwoods, then cut north where the pines thickened. She rode with her chin tucked against the wind, the mare picking her way over frozen ruts. It was nearly noon when the cabin came into view. Smoke rose from the chimney. A mule was tied outside. Wade stepped out before she had time to dismount. He didn't look surprised. He didn't speak either, just stood with his glove in one hand watching her. "I came to return your shirt," she said, swinging down from the saddle. "You rode a long way to do it. It's a good shirt." "Didn't want to keep it." He nodded once and stepped aside. She hesitated, then followed him in. The fire was strong and a pot of something fragrant simmered on the stove. "I didn't expect you," he said, taking the shirt from her hands and folding it slow like it meant something. "I didn't expect to come," she admitted, "but I couldn't stop thinking." He didn't ask what about. He moved to the stove and stirred the pot. "You want a plate?" "I didn't ride all this way for beans." He paused, ladle hovering. "No, I've been thinking about what you said. That you came here for quiet." He set the ladle down. "That's true." "I don't think you came just for that." He met her eyes. "What else then? You came to be alone because you got used to it, not because you like it." His jaw tightened just slightly. "It's easier." "Maybe. But it's not better." He didn't answer. She crossed the room and stood near the fire, letting the warmth sink in. Her voice dropped. "I've been alone since my father passed, but I didn't even notice how much until you pulled me out of that river." He stayed still, not turning. She watched the back of his shoulders, the way they stayed drawn, like he was bracing for something. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "I just needed to see if what I felt in that cabin wasn't just gratitude." Now he turned. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, something open, wary still but less guarded. "I haven't spoken this much to anyone in 4 years," he said. "I noticed. I don't know how to be around people anymore. You don't have to know. Just don't lie to yourself about wanting to try." He stepped closer, slow, like the space between them was a bridge that needed testing. When he reached her, he didn't touch her, but the heat of him was there, steady and real. "What are you hoping for?" His voice was low. "I don't want to go back to camp wondering," she said. "I want to know if I saw something true in you, that's all." His gaze held hers. "You did." She didn't breathe for a moment, then let it out slow. "I don't need anything fast," she said. "But I do need honest. I don't have much else." She smiled, but it was small, not the kind that ends a conversation, but the kind that begins something. He reached for her hand then, just lightly, his fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. They stood like that, quiet as the snow beginning to fall outside, the fire between them and the silence no longer something to avoid. After a while, he spoke again. "I carve sometimes when I can't sleep." She looked up. "You ever carve anything for someone else?" "No. Would you?" His thumb pressed gently against her palm. "I could try." She nodded. Outside, the snow thickened. They didn't send for words. They didn't need to. Something had already started. Something neither of them had known how to name until now. Wade had built a bench along the cabin's south-facing wall where the sun hit strongest come midday. The snow had softened under the light, turning crusted drifts to slush, and Petra sat beside him, her knees drawn up, steam curling from the tin mugs they held. Neither of them spoke for a long while. A jay called from a pine above, and somewhere farther off, a branch gave way under its own thaw. She stretched her legs, boots slick with meltwater. "I don't remember the last time I sat still without someone needing me to do something." "You're still," he said, not looking over, "but your hands keep twitching." She looked down at her fingers, then laughed once under her breath. "I don't know how to be idle, not anymore." Wade took a sip from his cup. "Idle ain't useless." Petra turned to him. "You were always like that?" "I was always quiet. That's not the same." She leaned back against the wall. "I used to talk more when Ma was alive. There was always music then and someone laughing. After she passed, it got quieter, and then Pa." She stopped. "Well, you already know that part." He didn't press her to keep going. "Just let the silence settle again, this time easy." She glanced over at him after a while. "You don't think I'm foolish for coming up here again?" "No," he said simply. "What do you think?" "I think you came because something in you told you it was right." She tilted her head. "You trust instinct that much?" "I have to. It's all I've got out here." She smiled, smaller this time, and turned back to the trees. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect? Someone rougher or harder? There's this idea of cowboys. I ain't an idea." "No," she said, "you're not." She set her cup on the bench and stood. The snow gave under her weight, soaking the hem of her skirt. She didn't care. She walked to the edge of the clearing where the land sloped down toward the hollow. The trees were bare but strong, branches reaching skyward like arms that refused to bend. Wade rose and followed, his boots crunching behind her. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the land my father leased. The foreman's letting it sit now, just wasting. I know it's not much, but there's good stone below the ridge. I remember Pa saying it'd support a foundation if someone ever wanted to build." "Build what?" She turned, her cheeks flushed from wind. "A house, maybe. A real one with a porch, and room for something more than bunk beds and firewood." He watched her for a long moment. "You thinking of staying in the territory for good?" "I haven't thought of leaving in months." She looked down, then back to him. "I just didn't have a reason to stay until now." He didn't move closer, but something in him shifted. His shoulders eased, his jaw unclenched. "Petra," he said, her name drawn out like something held too long. "There's nothing I would want more than a life built slow with someone who sees me how you do." Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She stepped forward, took his hand in hers, the same one that had pulled her from the river without a word or question. "I don't want to be saved," she said. "Not again. I want to walk beside someone, not behind." He nodded, his grip tightening just enough for her to feel it. "Then walk with me." "I will." She leaned her forehead against his chest, and his arms closed around her. They stood like that, quiet and sure, while the wind passed through the trees and the snow melted slow around their feet. Later, they cleared a patch beside the cabin for a second bench. She insisted on helping, even when her hands turned red from the cold. He let her, and when she laughed at the uneven legs, he didn't correct her. They ate together that evening by lamplight, their shoulders brushing with every small movement. She didn't speak much, and neither did he. But the silence was full now, not empty. Before she returned to camp the next morning, she left her scarf hanging on the peg by the door. "I'll be back," she said. He nodded. "I know." And when she rode down the path, he watched her go, not with worry, but with the steady knowing of a man who had waited most of his life for someone to come back. The thaw held through March. By early April, the pine needles underfoot had softened, and the river ran swollen and fast, dragging winter's ice out toward the Missouri. Petra came up the ridge most Fridays now, riding in with basket goods from town, things Wade hadn't asked for but never turned away. She had taken to tying her mare near the shed and knocking once on the door before walking in. He said she didn't need to, but she kept the habit. It gave her time to look at the cabin and know it was becoming hers too. This Friday, the basket held a jar of plum preserves, a folded scrap of gingham, and a square of beeswax wrapped in brown paper. She set it on the table while Wade chopped kindling outside, his coat off, sleeves rolled from wrist to elbow. He worked without rush, splitting each log clean, stacking every piece with care. "I saw a man in town selling a player organ last week," she said, leaning in the doorway, fingers tucked into the edge of her shawl. "He had it hitched to a wagon and kept turning the crank like he'd die if he stopped." Wade paused, resting the axe against a stump. "Did you want it?" "I wanted him to stop playing it." His mouth twitched. "That bad? Worse." He carried the stacked wood in and set it near the stove. She watched him move, the quiet ease of his body, the way he never took more than was needed and never left less. "I was offered a job," she said, fingers brushing the gingham. "Teaching the mill's children. 3 days a week. You thinking of taking it?" "I already did." He looked at her, one brow lifted. "I wanted to tell you in person," she said. "It's not far, just past the flats. I can ride there before sunup and be back by supper. You still planning to stay near the camp?" "I've no reason to anymore." She stepped forward, voice steady. "I want to build something here, with you." Wade set his hands on the back of the chair, eyes on her face. "I've been carving," he said. "More than usual." She tilted her head. "I thought maybe when you were ready I'd ask if you wanted to stay in this cabin, as yours." She stepped closer. "Not as a guest." "No." She reached for his hand, her fingers sliding along his rough palms and steady grip. "I want that," she said. "But not just the cabin. I want the days with you, and the nights. I want to plant something this spring and see it come up in summer beside us." Wade's throat moved once. "I never thought I'd have a life like that. You do now." He leaned in and pressed his forehead against hers, the air between them quiet and full. That night, he lit the lantern early. She unpacked the gingham and used it to line the cupboard shelf. They ate lentils with salt pork, and when the fire burned low, she pulled the quilt down from the loft and settled beside him. He didn't ask for more, just held her hand and watched the fire flicker. By the end of May, they stood on the ridge with a preacher from Emigrant and said their vows beneath the long blue sky. Petra wore her mother's brooch pinned to her collar and wildflowers in her braid. Wade wore his best shirt and his carved belt buckle, polished until it caught the sun. They built a new porch that summer, with wide steps and space for 2 chairs. Petra planted beans and turnips in a small plot near the shed. Wade built a chicken coop from spare boards and fixed the fence near the clearing. They rose early, worked until midday, then sat together when the sun was high, drinking coffee and listening to the wind move through the trees. When September came, Petra started her lessons near the flats, returning each afternoon with chalk dust on her sleeves and stories about the children. Wade listened always and sometimes laughed, low and genuine. He carved a small horse for one of the boys who had never spoken, and Petra watched the child carry it everywhere after that. They added a room to the back of the cabin that fall. Not because they needed it yet, but because they believed they would. One night in late October, Petra stepped outside to find Wade sitting on the porch, a mug in his hand, the stars clear above. "You're quiet tonight," she said, settling beside him. "I was thinking about you," he answered. "What about me?" "About the river, how cold it was, how close I came to never knowing you." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think," she said softly, "we found each other exactly when we were meant to." He nodded, then kissed the top of her head. They sat there until the moon rose high, wrapped in the kind of peace only earned through long, hard days and quiet, kept promises. And when winter came again, it found them side by side, doors latched not against loneliness, but only the cold.